Let me ask you something. Why is it that whenever Islam and women's education come up, people instantly assume restriction, oppression, or silence? It's almost like the whole narrative has been hijacked. But here's the thing, Islam's very first command was read. Think about that for a second. The very foundation of this faith begins with knowledge, not limitation. Now, fast forward to today. In 2025, we just witnessed one of the boldest moves in the Muslim world. Leaders, scholars, and even Malala Yousafzai standing side by side in Islamabad, declaring that Muslim girls must have full access to education. That's not rebellion against Islam, that's Islam in action. And yet, if you scroll online or talk to people in certain circles, you'll still hear, but Islam doesn't allow it. That's the disconnect I want to talk about. This isn't about politics, it's not about West versus East. It's about what the deen itself says. So buckle up because we're going deep. The truth about Islam and women's education will shock you. It's empowering, it's revolutionary, and honestly, it's something nobody talks about. Here's the crazy thing. When you actually go back to the roots of Islam, the evidence for women's education is the Prophet Muhammad said, seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim, male and female. That's not vague, that's not conditional, it's universal. But for some reason, culture has often drowned out religion. Now ask yourself, how did the early Muslim world become a center of science, medicine, and philosophy? Because women were part of that knowledge revolution. Scholars like Aisha bint Abu Bakr, one of the greatest narrators of hadith, were literally teaching men, even senior companion Fatima Afifri. She founded the world's very first university in Morocco, and she was a woman. That's not modern feminism. That's Islam, centuries ago. So why the disconnect? Why do we still see girls in rural areas being told that education is somehow un-Islamic? That's where you realize the difference between faith and culture. Joe Rogan would probably say, wait, is this religion or is this just people projecting their fears? And honestly, that's the question we all need to ask. The Islamabad Declaration of 2025 was such a powerful moment because it reminded the world of this forgotten truth. Religious scholars stood up and said, Islam supports girls' education. Political leaders said the future depends on it. And Nobel laureates like Malala highlighted when a girl studies, an entire generation rises with her. Think about the ripple effect. A girl with education doesn't just change her own life. She changes her family, her community, her society. And Islam at its core has always been about uplifting the individual to uplift the collective. That's why the very first command wasn't pray or fast, it was read. Because knowledge unlocks everything else. But here's where it gets real. The resistance isn't about Islam, it's about control. It's about fear of change. And if you look at history, that's always been the story. Every revolution of knowledge had its skeptics, its gatekeepers, its people who wanted to hold back progress. And yet, truth always breaks. So when people say Islam stops women from learning, that's not just inaccurate, it's the opposite of reality. Islam started with knowledge, encouraged women in education, and built a civilization where women were scholars, teachers, and leaders in thought. The tragedy is, somewhere along the way, culture blurred that vision. And that's why this conversation matters. Because in 2025, we're not just asking, can Muslim girls go to school? We're asking, can we return to the real essence of Islam? Can we revive that lost spirit of knowledge? And if the answer is yes, then we're not just empowering women, we're reigniting an entire civilization. Here's where the conversation gets even more interesting. If Islam is so clear on encouraging knowledge for both men and women, then how did we end up with the stereotype that Muslim women are kept in the dark? The answer, honestly, is a messy mix of cultural traditions, colonial narratives, and plain old ignorance. Let's be real, most of the people who argue that women shouldn't study can't even back it up with authentic Islamic sources. They'll throw around emotional arguments, but when you ask, show me where the Quran forbids women from learning, there's silence. Why? Because it's not there. In fact, the Quran constantly praises people of knowledge. Now here's where media plays a massive role. For decades, global media has portrayed Muslim women as oppressed, voiceless, and invisible. And while yes, oppression exists in some places, the problem is Those cultural practices got marketed as Islam. Imagine turning on the TV and seeing a headline, "Islam bans women from education." It sounds shocking, it sells, but it's not the truth. And once people repeat a lie often enough, it becomes a narrative. Joe Rogan would jump on this and say, "Wait a second, so are we dealing with reality here or a giant PR campaign gone wrong?" And honestly, he'd be right. The reality is very different on the ground. Across the Muslim world today, millions of girls are not only studying, but excelling, becoming doctors, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs. The stereotype is collapsing, and what's taking its place is a whole new generation of educated Muslim women who are rewriting the story. And guess what's accelerating this shift? Social media. TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. They've become platforms where young Muslim women are sharing Islamic reminders, busting myths, and showing that faith and education go hand in hand. You'll see a girl in a hijab quoting Quranic verses on seeking knowledge, while also acing medical school. That's powerful. That's a narrative mainstream media rarely shows, but it's spreading fast online. What's fascinating is how this digital revival connects back to the very spirit of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ once said, "The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets." Today, those scholars include women on podcasts, women writing research papers, women teaching online. And it makes sense because if you silence half your population, you silence half your wisdom. The Islamabad Declaration of 2025 tapped into that momentum. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a signal to the world. The time for excuses is over. Islam doesn't just allow women's education, it demands it. And now technology has given youth the tools to amplify that truth, louder than ever. So here's the big question. In the age of viral content and instant communication, will we finally replace centuries of misconception with the actual teachings of Islam? Or will old narratives keep dragging us back? That's the challenge, and it's one this generation has the power to answer. All right, let's push this conversation forward. If Islam has always supported knowledge, if history proves that women were scholars, and if today's youth are breaking stereotypes online, then the next logical question is, where do we go from here? Because here's the reality. We're living in one of the most critical moments in history. Technology has shrunk the world. An idea in Karachi can go viral in Cairo, Kuala Lumpur, New York in seconds. And in that hyper-connected environment, Islam's true teachings about education have the chance to travel faster and louder than ever before. Imagine this, a Muslim girl in a remote village of Pakistan with just a smartphone, listening to scholars online who explain that Islam actually commands her to seek knowledge. For her, that's not just information, it's liberation. It's proof that she doesn't need to choose between her faith and her future, because in Islam they are the same thing. Now think globally. In 2025, we're facing massive challenges: climate change, mental health crises, AI reshaping the job market, wars that displace millions. Who's going to solve these problems? It's not about men versus women. It's about humanity working together. And if half of humanity is denied education, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. Islam's vision was never about half power. It was always about full power, full participation, full responsibility. And this is where the Joe Rogan style of questioning comes in handy. If he were sitting here, he'd probably say, "Hold on, so the world's oldest religion was actually ahead of the curve on equality and knowledge. But we've been told the opposite for decades. How does that even make sense?" That's the irony. It doesn't. What makes sense is the Quranic vision of an ummah rising together through knowledge, justice, and balance. The Islamabad Declaration wasn't just a headline, it was a mirror. It forced us to look at ourselves and ask, have we drifted so far from our roots that we need conferences to remind us of the basics? Because let's be honest, this should not be controversial. If the Prophet taught that seeking knowledge is obligatory for men and women, then why are we even debating this in 20? Here's the answer. Because every generation needs a wake-up call. And maybe this generation's wake-up call isn't a battlefield or a revolution. It's classrooms instead of trenches, laptops instead of swords. It's the realization that when a girl learns, she raises the literacy rate, she lowers poverty, she strengthens the economy, and she plants seeds of peace. That's not just an Islamic value, That's a universal human value. But in Islam, it's framed as worship. Every time a girl learns, she fulfills a command of God. How powerful is that? Now let's get real. This isn't going to be easy. There will always be resistance, people who feel threatened by change, people who hide behind religion to push their own cultural fears. But history shows us something important. Progress might be delayed, but it cannot be stopped. Truth has a way of breaking through. So the real test isn't, will Muslim women get educated? That's already happening. The real test is, will we as a global community embrace it fully, unapologetically, and with the same passion Islam itself commands? Because if we do, the impact won't just be on Muslim societies, it'll echo across the world. Education isn't just about getting a job, it's about dignity, it's about voice, it's about purpose, and in Islam it's about fulfilling a divine trust. So when the world finally sees Muslim women standing on stages, writing books, building businesses, leading research and raising generations, it won't just be progress, it'll be a revival of the very spirit that once made the Muslim world a beacon of knowledge. And maybe, just maybe, that's the chapter of history we're about to write. So here we are, the truth is on the table. Islam has always been on the side of education for men and women alike. History proves it. Quran affirms it. The Prophet Torah practiced it, and now in 2025 the world is finally being forced to re-acknowledge it. But the bigger question isn't just, do we believe this? It's, what are we going to do with it? Because let's face it, belief without action is just empty talk. You can post hashtags, you can share quotes, you can even sign declarations, but until people actually change how they think and how they behave, nothing really shifts. And that's where the challenge lies. Think about it. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are millions of Muslim girls across the globe who dream of going to school but can't. Some are stopped by poverty, some by culture, some by war, and sadly, some by people misusing religion to justify their control. Every single one of those stories is a loss, not just for that girl, but for the Ummah, for humanity, because every mind denied knowledge is a light turned off. Joe Rogan would probably lean back in his chair at this point and say something like, "Man, that's crazy. You're telling me one of the biggest religions in the world is being misrepresented to its own followers?" And yes, that's exactly what's happening. But here's the flip side. It also means we have the power to flip the script. Let's not forget the legacy we come from. This was the same civilization that, when Europe was drowning in the Dark Ages, was producing hospitals, libraries, and universities. Muslim women were not spectators in that process. They were contributors. The decline happened when we forgot our own principles, when culture and fear replaced faith and courage. The revival begins the moment we remember. Now imagine this, a world where every Muslim girl has access to education. What does that look like? It looks like more doctors in villages where healthcare is a luxury. It looks like scientists tackling climate change with solutions rooted in both modern science and Islamic stewardship of the earth. It looks like mothers raising children who know not just how to survive, but how to thrive. That's not just a dream, it's an obligation. And here's the thing nobody talks about. Education is not just a worldly tool in Islam, it's an act of worship. When you study, when you seek truth, when you expand your mind, you're fulfilling a command from Allah. So when a girl opens a book, she's not just preparing for a job, she's worshiping. She's connecting with the divine order of the universe. And that transforms the way we should see this entire issue. But change won't happen automatically. It requires courage. It requires speaking up when people misuse religion to deny rights. It requires communities investing in schools, scholarships, and safe spaces for girls to learn. It requires men standing up not as gatekeepers, but as allies, because empowering women doesn't weaken men, it strengthens society. And here's the final piece: youth. The younger generation, the ones watching this right now, you have more power than you think. You're not limited to the four walls of a classroom. With a phone in your hand, you have access to the world's knowledge. With a camera or a mic, you have the power to challenge narratives, spread truth, and build communities. This is the era of digital revival, and it's happening whether the gatekeepers like it or not. So let me leave you with this. The truth about Islam and women's education isn't hidden, it's just ignored. The Quran begins with read. The Prophet Torah declared knowledge obligatory for all. History proves women led the way in scholarship, and today the world is finally remembering. The question is, will you be part of that revival, or will you stand on the sidelines? Will you challenge the lazy stereotypes, or let them continue? Will you invest in knowledge, or let ignorance win? Because in the end, this isn't just about women. This is about the future of Islam, the future of the Ummah, and honestly, the future of humanity. Every educated girl is a step toward light. Every barrier removed is a step toward progress, and every truth spoken is a step toward justice. So let's stop whispering about it. Let's stop letting others define our deen for us. Let's speak it boldly, live it proudly, and embody it fully. Islam stands with education, for men, for women, for everyone. And the sooner we embrace that truth, the sooner we'll see the rise of a generation that proves Islam's wisdom was always centuries ahead. And maybe, just maybe, when the history books of tomorrow are written, they'll say 2025 wasn't just the year of a declaration, it was the year the Muslim world remembered who it really was.